all that is good, for all that is free, to the North Star, to the North Star.
Good morning and welcome. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump has criticized Ukraine's use of U.S.-supplied missiles for attacks deep into Russian territory. Quote, "It's crazy what's taken place. It's crazy. I disagree very vehemently with sending missiles hundreds of miles into Russia. Why are we doing that? We're just escalating this war and making it worse. That should not have been allowed to be done," Trump said, as we discussed last week. This while U.S. Representative Michael McCaul, the House Foreign Affairs chair, has called Tulsi Gabbard a baffling pick to lead the nation's intelligence community, offering one of the sternest rebukes from a Republican yet. Are these examples of President-elect Trump daring to take on the intelligence community? Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. Here's the point. We have a tendency to view current events as though they happen in a vacuum, failing to understand the broader historical context in which most of these events occur. During each episode, my guests and I have probing, provocative, and in-depth discussions that connect the dots and the broader historic context in which they take place, thus enabling you to better understand and analyze the events that impact the global village in which we live. On today's episode, the issue before us is President-elect Trump daring to take on the intelligence community? Is he crazy or crazy like a fox? My guest is someone who can provide some invaluable insight into this and other issues. He works with Tell the Word, a publishing arm of the Ecumenical Church of the Savior in Washington, D.C. During his 27-year career with the CIA, he supervised intelligence analysis as chief of the Soviet Foreign Policy Branch and as also editor and briefer of the President's Daily Brief. In retirement, he's co-founded Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. Ray McGovern. Ray, as always, welcome back.
Thanks, Wilmer. It's good to be back with you.
So, as we are speaking right now, Russian President Putin is holding his annual press conference, and I think he is talking about the Oreshnik hypersonic missile. Enlighten us, Ray. Bring us up to date.
Well, I have a friend who is glued to the TV. He's in Europe, and he's fluent in Russian. And so he gave me a heads up. Putin is even now winding up the Q&A part of his 4-hour address to the country. It's an annual thing. What he has already reported is an air of confidence on the part of Putin that not only manifests itself in his demeanor and his remarks, but also in his willingness to take questions from people like the ABC correspondent, who started out by saying, "Now, President Putin, you've been losing in Ukraine. You've got several terrible casualties, and you're weaker now than ever. So how are you going to cope with that?" So
that's a great way to start the conversation.
Yeah. So he's just trying to win points with ABC, Anyhow, so Putin says, "Well, actually, we're winning. Actually, we're a lot stronger. Look at the growth in our GDP, and blah, blah, blah." Very calm, cool, and connected. And later he says, "Look, this Oreshnik missile this incredibly fast Mach 10, Mach 11, would you believe? Mach, of course, being the speed of sound. That is a game changer. And no matter how often your superiors in Washington, in the administration pretty much runs ABC and the rest of the main channel. No matter how many times they say, this is not a game changer, this is not a game changer. Let me tell you, it's a game changer. Now, let me try to illustrate this for you. You can't defend them against it. You have very sophisticated, up to about 10 years ago, missilery and air defense systems that are defensive and might try to shoot this down. So we're going to tell you, we're going to pick a point in Ukraine, okay? And we're going to give you 2 days to set up all this missilery or stuff. I don't think he said 2 days. We'll give you time to set up all these defenses, and then we'll give you 30 minutes warning, as we always do, and then we're going to fire this thing. Let's see what happens. Make sure there are no women and children anywhere near that site, okay? So, hello, he's got this. This is part of his new confidence, It is a game changer. It's just short of the game changer that happened over Hiroshima and Nagasaki back in 1945. It's a new weapon. It doesn't have the radioactivity. It is pretty, well, it's not pretty, it's incredibly accurate. And again, it cannot be defended against. So here's Putin sort of riding high and just sort of crossing his fingers that the collective Biden, what I mean by that is Blinken and Sullivan and Biden, don't do anything even more stupid in these next 5 weeks that they've done heretofore.
In fact, well, a couple of things. One, the Oreshnik has multiple warheads within the main warhead. So, and then also, can we consider the Kinjal missile to be similar? That's fired from aircraft, but it's hypersonic as well. So is that similar to a smaller version of the Oreshnik?
Actually, I think it's a bigger version, but you're right. It's hypersonic. And that's a strategic missile. Now, what Putin has been careful to say is that even though this goes just to the outer limit of the kind of range that the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty prohibited, it's just right there. It's not a strategic missile. But we are putting it into our strategic rocket forces. Mm-hmm. So what he's saying is, look, we had a good deal going. When Gorbachev came up with the idea and broached it to Reagan and said, look, there's no need for these intermediate range or these shorter range ballistic missiles. There are hundreds of them in Europe on SS-20s of our Soviet system, Pershing 2s of yours. Let's just destroy them all. We got a deterrent. We don't need any more. We don't need a hair trigger of 10 minutes rather than 30 minutes. And Reagan came to us and he said, huh? Is this guy serious? And we said, well, so far he has appeared to be the real deal. Look what he's done internally. Just changed that whole society around with open media and those kinds of things, criticizing Communist Party functionary. Try it out. See what he does. So then he was back and talks to Gorbachev, and they say, can you verify this? Well, Scott Ritter, my good friend, he was the first one on the ground in Russia to verify the destruction. I'm not saying the limitation, the destruction of a whole class of nuclear missiles that was done. The proposal was in 1987 by Gorbachev. They were all destroyed in the 3 years after that. And then a president named Trump was told by his military-industrial complex, look, we'd like to develop those missiles. We'd like to do it like it was before this treaty. And Trump, for whatever reason, says, oh, okay, now that treaty is null and void. Trump got out of it his last year in power, the first time around. And now the Russians said, okay, well, if you're going to play that game, We're ready with the most sophisticated missiles you ever saw, and they're so fast you won't even saw them.
That's a frightening reality. You have a post on your website from January, and the video is from January 2nd, 2017. Senator Schumer warns newcomer Trump, do not dare take on the intelligence community. Wiser to the ways of Washington now, Trump and his appointees seem determined to do precisely that. Very, very big stakes on who can prevail. Ray, what's at stake here, and what gives you pause for concern?
Well, Wilmer, the same forces, basically, the military, industrial, congressional, intelligence, media complex. Okay,
the Mickey Matt.
The Mickey Matt. That was responsible for example, telling Trump, get out of that INF treaty. We destroyed whole class of missiles, but that was a mistake. Let's build them up again. These guys really can do some really sophisticated missiles. Well, maybe they can, but they haven't shown that capability yet. Anyhow, those same forces are in power and did their utmost to make sure that Trump didn't win in 2016. I mean, it's on the record now. There was no Russian hacking of the DNC. Sworn testimony under oath shows that. And there's all kinds of things now that are shown to have been a hoax, just like Donald Trump said. Now, on that, I don't shy away from agreeing with Donald Trump. On the other business that you mentioned at the outset, that it's terribly foolish to be firing longer range ballistic missiles into Russia at a range of almost 200 miles in country. That's very foolish. That's stupid. That's crazy. I agree with Trump on that. Now, those are two things I agree with Trump on. There are doubtless others. Give me a second. Those may be the only. Okay. Those may be the only two. Sorry about that.
Not a problem. It happens to us all.
No. I think those.
Those
search my memory. Those really are
the only two. As I say, even a blind squirrel can find a nut in the forest sometimes.
Good.
So with that, and as we look at his current posture, what signals to you do you see as positive, and what signals do you see as being of concern?
Well, going in, you have to say that the deep state, the deep national security state, if you will, has been running this country ever since they assassinated John Kennedy in 1963. So it's a tough, there he is, right up there on my bookshelf. It's a tough nut to crack. And anyone who hasn't read that book by James Douglas, JFK and the Unspeakable, well, read it before you start carping about whether this really happened. So coming down to the present, or almost the present, we're talking 2017 now. Okay, Trump won 2016 despite all the efforts, and there were many efforts by the deep state to prevent him from winning and to make sure that Hillary Clinton won. Okay, all kinds of extra legal, all kinds of tricky things that the DNC and the Democrats did. It's all on the record, and worst of all for the Democrats, Trump knows chapter and verse, and the person he's picked for head of the FBI, Kash Patel, knows chapter and verse and the footnotes.
Right.
He knows everything that went down,
and we're going to get to that.
And he knows who did it. So let's go back to Schumer. So Trump wins, and next thing you know, he's going to be coming into office in just 18 days. Okay, so this is the 2nd, if memory serves, of January 2017. So what we have is Chuck Schumer calling up Rachel Maddow and said, "Rachel, I have something really important. Let me come in and have a segment today." I'll tell you. So goes in the evening, and Rachel says, "Chuck, you said you have very interesting information. You're saying that Trump is not being very smart about it. What is it, Chuck?" And Chuck says, "Rachel, I've never seen the like of it. I thought he was a smart fellow, businessman, all that stuff, this Trump, but he'd made a terrible mistake. He's taken on the intelligence community. And they have 6 ways from Sunday to get back at you. Very, very foolish thing." Okay, so now I don't know if Trump, president-elect at the time, was told by his associates, "Hey, they're throwing down the cudgel again, okay? They're warning you, don't take us on, okay?" Well, somehow or other, they didn't really understand the message. And instead of taking on these creeps, he decided, well, maybe I'm a good schmoozer. I'll take Jim Comey, head of the FBI at the time, by the shoulder, and I'll get him to be loyal to me, just like all those real estate people up there do. It's going to be a piece of cake. Well, he couldn't do it, all right? So that was the beginning, the warning. 18 days before he becomes president, he tries it and he fails. Now, what's the difference now? Well, the past is the difference. He knows what happened for those 4 years. And the people that he's picked, in some respects, Kash Patel especially, but also Tulsi Gabbard, are people who could rein the intelligence community in if possible. Now, that's the big question. Is it possible? I don't know, but, and will Trump try, or will he give up like he did last time? He gave up, okay? He didn't even do the things that a president could do, and that is automatically declassify stuff that showed what was done to him. He could have taken it to the Washington Post personally and had, this is what they did. Now, the question would be whether the Washington Post would print it. Anyhow, the cards are stacked against him, is what I'm saying. Will he be so foolish, in Schumer's words, to take on the intelligence community and try to work out some sensible deal with the Russians, for example? Well, there's one good omen, and that is that unlike 2017, as he was coming into office, he's not afraid of criticizing the U.S. foreign policy when it's stupid as can be, namely firing missiles deep into Russia, well, 200 miles into Russian territory. He's called it foolish. He said, why are we doing this? Well, I don't think he would have felt comfortable or empowered to do that when he was coming into office in 2017. Now he doesn't give a rat's patootie if people call him in Putin's pocket or whatever they say, because he's calling it like it is, and it is extremely foolish. And as I said, that's one of the two only things that I agree with Donald Trump.
Well, and that takes me to one of the questions I asked in the open. So back in 2019, he met with North Korean President Kim Jong-un for the 3rd time, becoming the first U.S. president to set foot in North Korea before announcing that the two countries would revive nuclear talks. I quoted him about the ATACMS going deep into Russia. Many people like to categorize him as being anti-war. Now, he's also the same guy who pushed the button on General Soleimani. He took the U.S. out of the JCPOA, but he also recently told Netanyahu, finish the job as it relates to the genocide in Gaza before I get into the White House. So there seem to be some inconsistencies here. Is he crazy, or is he crazy like a fox?
He's unpredictable. I spent a half century trying to put myself in the shoes of Kremlin leaders. Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter if I think that Trump is unpredictable. It's what they think. Mm-hmm. Just think.
And President Putin has been very clear on that point when he said, I prefer Joe Biden to Donald Trump. And the reason was not so much a political reason. It was predictability.
Yeah, that's what he said to the interviewer. He said, the premium is on predictability. Of course, it makes good sense. You're on the other side of the world. You have your fingers on the button. you have the power to blow up the rest of the world and end Western civilization or eat all civilization. And it all depends on whether this guy on the other side of the world is predictable. And in my view, and I think in the Kremlin's view, Trump is the epitome of unpredictability. So, so there are no, bright clouds in the distance once Trump comes in, unless he shows behavior that he has not demonstrated in the past. You mentioned all the things that bode for war, more war rather than peace. And the Middle East is a can of worms. We can talk about that later if you like.
Right.
But
Yes.
I'm hopeful about Ukraine because he has said the right things. The people that he has appointed to be negotiators, General Kellogg, Fred Fleitz, and those people have come up with proposals that are not all that far from the conditions laid down by Putin himself. There's a deal to be had. As I've been saying jocularly, but also seriously, look, we all know that Putin is going to take over all Ukraine, and then he's going to take over Poland and the Baltic states, right? Okay, we all know that because that's what our newspapers and media have told us.
And then he's gonna put his hands on Cleveland.
Oh, I didn't hear about Cleveland.
Oh yeah, he wants Cleveland too.
I don't think. Well,
and don't forget Florida. Don't forget Florida because he's going to Disney World.
That would be two bridges too far, I think, Cleveland and Florida.
Okay.
Anyhow, we all know that, right? So here's Trump. He comes in and he reads the tea leaves and he says, he has a session with Putin, and he comes back and he goes before this same ABC correspondent that just challenged Putin, and he says, hey, I got good news for you. I just got a commitment from Donald Trump, got a commitment from Vladimir Putin. He has agreed not to take over Poland, not to take over the Baltic states, and not even to take over all Ukraine. I did that, okay? Now we're going to deal on the little particulars, okay? Well, they already accomplished what Biden reassured everybody Putin wanted to do. Now, that's all cockamamie stuff that Putin wanted to do. The last thing he wants to do, all this stuff, would be that, okay? But there are people in Europe, as well as in the United States, that believe that's the case. So, in rhetorical terms, in PR terms, that's open for Trump to say, oh, no, I used my charm to get Putin to say, all right, we won't go into Poland. It sounds crazy, but the American people are so conditioned to believing whatever Biden and his acolytes say that were Trump to take this line, it would have a certain resonance, in my view.
So on the domestic front, and we've just touched on this, but I want to delve into it a little deeper. Trump's nomination of Kash Patel, a fierce loyalist, to be the next director of the FBI, and he has sent. So we know Patel is a true Trump loyalist. Is this a matter of Trump setting up the weaponization of the FBI? What do you know about Kash Patel, and do you have concern? Is he competent and a decent selection or nominee to lead the FBI?
Well, I have not met him personally, but I've followed him very closely over the last several years. He doesn't want to destroy the FBI or the Justice Department. He wants to demilitarize it. He wants to disarm it from political interference. He knows chapter and verse. He worked on the House Intelligence Committee when Devin Nunes was chair of that committee. He knows what happened. He knows exactly what happened. He knows the tricks, the dirty tricks that James Comey and John Brennan of the CIA tried to do, of course with James Clapper as well, to do Trump in before the election and then after the election. Matter of fact, most people don't read books anymore, and I don't much either, but I have to read. It's part of my duties as a media analyst. So I had to read Comey's book, right? He wrote about two 2 years after he was sacked, So he says, how to explain what happened? Well, here it is, quote, I was working in an environment in which Hillary Rodham Clinton was sure to be the next president of the United States, period, end quote. Whoa. So you're working in that kind of environment where if you do dirty tricks or exceed the law or the regulations, you're gonna be rewarded. You might become Attorney General, for God's sake. Nobody's going to come after you. She's going to win. If anybody finds out what you did, forget about it. Forget about it. It's not going to be a problem, okay? What's the problem? She lost. So, this is the way these guys... So, getting back to Kash Patel, he knows all this. He has said on the record that he knows all this. And he's got a book out with 60 people. What is he called? Gangsters. 60 gangsters that deserve to be gone after by the Justice Department. Now, I'm surprised only that he lists only 60. He knows 120 or more. So the question is, what's going on now in the White House? If you don't mind a little light jocular stuff here, I heard a report today that etiquette in the White House has really improved over the last week or two. No, really, they're all saying, pardon me, and instead of elbowing their way past, there's a pardon me. Oh, Mr. President, pardon me. God.
Now, to that point, Joe Biden's pardoning of Hunter, is it crazy for me to suggest that in Joe Biden pardoning Hunter, he was also pardoning himself by being sure that Hunter could not be used later on to get to Joe, based upon the machinations they were involved in? Remember, 10% for the big fella.
Well, the laptop did show those things. and the fact that Hunter can't be gone after anymore, I just don't know. I'm not a lawyer, thank God. But I don't know whether that immunizes his dad. If that stuff is out there, well, that's another question. Can Biden say, "Oh, and by the way, I'm pardoning myself"?
No. My question was really, by pardoning Hunter, that now takes Hunter off the table. And by taking Hunter off the table, that takes Joe off the table, because Hunter would be an avenue to get to him if Kash Patel were to try to put the screws to him.
Well, I don't know if that would work.
Okay.
But I understand what you're saying. It may not be that it wouldn't work, but I really can't say. When we talk about Hunter's laptop, I'd like a minute or two to explain to the audience, since it was, 4 years ago. So, they found Hunter's laptop because Hunter forgot to pick it up at the repair shop in Delaware. So this guy didn't know what to do with it, and then they looked at the hard drive and said, "My God, so I better give it to the FBI." So I gave it to the FBI. They didn't do anything, okay? This is about 2 months before the election, okay? So what happens? Oh, the New York Post has a report, and there are other people who are saying, "Oh, the 10% for the big guy." It was the big guy. That has to be Joe, right? Daddy Joe. So what the deal was, my God, we have to suppress the fact that Daddy was on the take, not only with the Ukrainians, but with the Chinese. And so we got to hide that. How do we do that? So a fellow named Antony Blinken, who was really concerned about this because he wanted his candidate, Joe Biden, to win, he calls up Mikey Morell. Mikey Morell is a young fella. He was acting director of the CIA when all his predecessors were thoroughly discredited, and they didn't have anybody else. Anyhow, he knows Antony, and Antony knows Mikey, and Antony says, "Mikey, can you help me out here? The last debate is coming up between Joe Biden, my pal, and that fella Trump. And the laptop is big news, even though we've done everything we can on YouTube and Twitter and everything to suppress it, okay? So can you get 5 former intelligence directors to come out and say, well, you could say, yeah, it's a Russian operation. That don't believe anything is a Russian operation. You think you can do that, Mikey? And Mikey says, when you need it. And Blinken says, well, the debate's next week, maybe 2 or 3 days. Oh, I'll give it to you tomorrow. So Mikey gets on a horn, gets his folks calling people, comes up with 50 former intelligence directors or deputy directors or high muckety-mucks, as my grandmother would say, okay? So he got them all. He calls up Blinken and he says, hey, Anthony, no sweat. You asked for 5. I got 50 for you. And I'm going to have myself because I was acting intelligence director. So 51, use that, Anthony. So thanks so much, Mikey. So here's the debate, right? Trump, after 4 years, is still not wise to the ways in Washington, still has lousy advice. So he's not prepared for this. He says to Biden, what about that laptop that shows you are on the take there with the Chinese and with the Israel? What about that laptop? And Joe Biden springs to his defense and says, Mr. Trump, did anyone tell you that 51 former intelligence directors and deputy directors has said this bears all the earmarks of a Russian intelligence disinformation operation? Did you hear that? My God, you ought to pick up on the news there, Mr. Trump. Perfect squelch, of course. Dead lie, of course, but it worked, okay? Now, I'm not sure that won the election for Joe Biden. But it sure didn't help Trump when he had this golden nugget and he muffed it by just doing some little research. Now these 51 people who signed that, my guess is that not one of them went to the FBI, which they all knew had Hunter's laptop, and asked the FBI, hey, does this bear all the earmarks of a Russian intelligence disinformation operation? Because they would have been told, no, no, it's just pornography and worse, graft and so forth. But none of them asked. That shows how bad it is. And it's a very marked reflection, because I've talked to some of these guys. Like, I know, I worked with them, okay? And they said, well, we were so intent on not letting Trump win that, we were willing to do that, even though it wasn't true. So that's Trump derangement syndrome to a T, when you have these otherwise, well, a couple of them at least, were otherwise ethical leaders of intelligence. Well, maybe just 2 of them, 2 of the 51. They just succumb to this syndrome, the Trump derangement syndrome, and it's still very much in effect. So there are still limits to what he can do, unless he works some kind of miracle with Cash Patel, who knows where all the bodies are buried, and who makes no bones about the fact that he's going to pursue these miscreants. What does he call them? These gangsters. At least 60 of them that he lists in his book that he wrote a couple of years ago.
You know, Ray, it's just dawned on me that you and I have been having conversations like this for 20 years.
Yeah.
You and I've been interviewing you. You first came on my radar, and we first had a discussion about George W. Bush going into Iraq. And I remember I knew I had someone of value in front of me when I made reference to Dick Cheney as a neocon. And you said to me, and I quote, Wilmer, I'm a conservative. There is nothing conservative about Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney is a fascist, not a conservative. And I said, oh my God. He used the F word. He dropped an F-bomb. I got to stick with this guy. And we have been I just wanted to let the audience know, we have been having these conversations for 20 years. Thank you, Ray.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground, On Dick Cheney, one of our Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity quit, VIPS, when the majority of us wanted to warn President Bush that if he didn't already, Dick Cheney was his downfall. That Dick Cheney was we recommended he be removed from office by Bush. So,
in fact, let me ask you this, as a sidebar, but I think it's relevant. What were your thoughts when Vice President Harris embraced Liz Cheney and then Dick Cheney? Because I was saying during the campaign that Vice President Harris made a mistake. She got her Liz's confused. That instead of chasing Liz Cheney, she should have been chasing Elizabeth Warren, and that instead of embracing Dick Cheney, she should have been going after what's his name from Vermont, Bernie Sanders. Your thoughts?
Well, this is painful because as much as we can poke fun at the Cheneys, they were abominable. I think that Dick played a role in 9/11. I know he was the impetus behind pleasing Sharon at the time and Netanyahu later, making war on Iraq and so forth. But maybe in a lighter vein, I can just say that I had a friend who was politically astute. She was a woman, a Catholic woman, very devout. And when Dick Cheney would go into the hospital for $1 million worth of special stuff to make his heart still tick, she came to me and she said, "Ray, I don't think God is listening to my prayers anymore. I don't know." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, every time Dick Cheney goes into the hospital, I pray so hard, and then he always gets better." Okay, sorry about that.
Okay. So let's now back to our regularly scheduled program. You have another, and you've touched on this, but I'd like you to elaborate. You have another piece on your site. After 4 Obama-Biden betrayals, Putin won't be fooled again. Trump needs to know it will be an uphill battle to deal with Putin after 4 Obama-Biden betrayals. And those are the Maidan coup, the Minsk agreement, a conversation that took place between President Putin and President Biden Christmas a couple of years ago when Biden was in Delaware, and an agreement that was reached in Istanbul. If you could elaborate, please.
Well, I thought it was important to warn the Trump people that they're not starting with a clean slate. The U.S. foreign policy prime movers have been duplicitous and have actually betrayed their word or gone back on their word at least 4 times since the Maidan coup. Now, I'm an intelligence analyst. I've been watching things in the Kremlin for 50 years, but I don't have a PhD. And I haven't written really thick books, chapters, but not thick books. But there are historians that have a PhD and that have resonance in respectable circles. One of those is a fellow named Gordon Hahn. He's out on the West Coast, as far as I can tell. But he wrote this incredible wrap-up. He said, look, there are 4 horsemen of this apocalypse for Ukraine. And here are the most recent deceptions. And they were the ones you just mentioned, the Maidan. Well, they thought they had worked out a deal in the Maidan where Yanukovych, the duly elected leader, would call early elections, that Yanukovych would tell the police to stop shooting at the demonstrators. That was on the 21st of February 2014, and everything was going to be solved. Right, it's going to be solved. The people on the Maidan kept shooting at the soldiers. People from the apartment buildings around there were shooting both the soldiers and the demonstrators. Bedlam pursued. They knocked Yanukovych out of office. He had to run away and be rescued by the Russians. That was the first deal that was broken. Now, what most people don't know about this is that at that precise time, Joe Biden, vice president, he called Yanukovych and he said, look, no problem. All manner of things are going to be all right. So don't worry. Just make sure that your police don't shoot at those demonstrators. so Yanukovych later admitted, well, I trusted the Vice President of the United States, and of course, it didn't turn out that way. Meanwhile, Obama called Putin. Putin was in Sochi watching the wrap-up of the Winter Olympics. And he said, no, don't worry about this. We got everything under control. It's going to be a peaceful settlement, early election, all this stuff. So here's Putin. Do you think he felt a little diddled or deceived or tricked? Of course he did. Okay. Came back the next day on the 23rd, the day after the coup, 23rd of February, 2014. Got together with his military and other advisors. So what are we going to do? I mean, there's a coup regime. It was predicted 2.5 weeks ago on YouTube with an intercepted conversation between Victoria Nuland on the one hand and the U.S. ambassador in Kiev, Jeffrey Pyatt, on the other. So we knew it was coming. I'm surprised that it wasn't blown, but there it is. What are we going to do? Well, first thing we have to do is make sure that Crimea, where our only ice-free all-year-round naval base is located, doesn't go to NATO, huh? Okay, so they did that first. Now, the rest of the stuff you've seen play out, but that was what happened there on the Maidan. It was a deception, pure and simple, and it was led by the top leaders of our country, speaking to their opposite numbers, Yanukovych in Ukraine and Putin when he was in Sochi. So that was number one. Number two, Minsk. After the coup, the Ukrainian army was not very good, but they went after people who didn't want to submit to the coup regime. People in Donetsk and Lugansk, part of the Donbass. Okay, so they fought, and there was a lot of killing. And finally, people said, "Look, this is really stupid. Why don't we get together, have a ceasefire?" They did. They met in Minsk, Belarus. They worked out terms. One of the terms eventuated was that, look, you give Donetsk and Lugansk, primarily Russian stock people, Russian language speakers, a degree of autonomy in a new constitution for Kiev. We do that? Okay, that was one of the big deals. Who signed up to that? The French, the Germans, the Ukrainians. The Poles were sort of, Sikorsky was out of by then. Anyhow, that was the guarantee. And what happened? Well, nobody fulfilled the Minsk agreement. Instead, they built up the Ukrainian forces. And how do I know this? Because Angela Merkel, the German chancellor at the time, admitted, just as the special military operations started, those Minsk Accords, they were really very useful because they gave us a lot of time, 7 years actually, to build up the Ukrainian army, which was a shambles at the beginning, to arm them, to train them to NATO. So look at them now, look at them now. So yeah, it was a ruse. And then Francois Hollande, the president of France at the time, said exactly the same thing. Okay, you're Putin, and you're looking on at this, and you're saying, oh, dirty word, okay? And then your generals and your admirals are saying, why the hell did you trust these people for 7 years? We knew they were building up their army. Well, Putin would have to say, well, we finally did it, and we're winning, so past is past. I won't be fooled again. Now, the third one is the one closest to my heart, because as an intelligence analyst, as a media analyst, you have to read everything. I think I said that before, including these long 3.5-hour Q&As that Putin does. And you have to sort of read all the readouts from important conversations. So I did. And what I learned was this, that on the 29th of December 2021, so just 2 months before the invasion of Ukraine, Putin called Biden, or the Kremlin called the White House and said, Mr. Putin wants to talk to Mr. Biden like right now. And the White House said, our negotiators, as agreed, are going to meet in Geneva in 12 days. Well, why right now? Please, Mr. Putin asks, special favor right now. Well, to his credit, Biden said, well, what's to lose? Sure, I'll take the call. He was home alone. He was home alone for Christmas. He was in Delaware. He didn't have his collective Biden with him. No Sullivan, no Blinken. Okay, and so when I'm sure this is the way the conversation went. Putin, Mr. President, maybe it was a mistake to tell him this, but I told my top military people on the 21st of December, so just about 9 days ago, I told them that you intended to put offensive strike missiles in Ukraine as well as in Romania and Poland. And that when the U.S. finally got hypersonic missiles, they would be put into Ukraine, and that then I would only have 5 minutes to decide whether to blow up the rest of the world. I told my military that, and they said to me, Vladimir Vladimirovich, please try to extract a concession from President Trump, where at least the U.S. agrees not to put these missiles, we call them
Biden.
Offensive strike missiles.
A concession from Biden.
Yeah, what did I say?
Trump.
No, sorry about that.
No problem.
So, yeah, from Biden. Mm-hmm. So that's the background. So here Biden goes to Trump and he says, look, not Trump, but
Putin.
Putin goes to Biden and says, look, it's not a big deal. You got them in Romania already. You're going to have them in Poland. Can you do this to get things started really well in Geneva in 12 days, and then we can sort of wrap this thing up and not have a war? And, Joe Biden sounds good to me. I mean, sure, we got, yeah. So he says yes. And the readout says Mr. Biden agreed that the U.S. had no intention of putting offensive strike missiles in Ukraine, period, end quote. Well, great rejoicing in Moscow the next day, New Year's Eve, okay? And then they were already all set to go for the negotiations in Geneva. When our delegation said they didn't hear about this, they had no instructions. And then Lavrov meets with Blinken on the 21st of January and says, okay, Tony, that was a nice gesture by your president. Let's get down to brass tacks. Let's work out the modalities of this prohibition on offensive strike missiles in Ukraine. And Blinken says, forget about it. He was home alone. He didn't have us with us. Forget about it. We have every right to put offensive strike missiles in Ukraine, and we'll do it if they ask us. So forget about it. Now, we might be willing to talk about numbers, like how many, but forget what Biden said. Okay. So Lavrov reports back to Putin, of course, and Putin, my God, who do I trust here, Meanwhile, he's got the Chinese on board, having visited Beijing on the 4th of February, and on the 12th of February, Biden and Putin have their last summit conversation, and I read the readout from that, and it said Biden refused to talk about not letting Ukraine into NATO, and he also refused to talk about his earlier undertaking not to put offensive strike missiles in Ukraine. Now, why do I feel so good about that? Because I couldn't really get much play on that, even though it seemed to me extremely, extremely important, until Gordon Khan, a historian of Russia, an incredibly bright guy, says not only this was the third of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, but this was the tiebreaker. This was the one that persuaded Putin. You can't deal with these guys. You got to go clean things up in Ukraine. So what I wanted to do is sort of make clear to the incoming administration that they're behind the eight ball here. They're sort of like the guy who cleans up after the elephants, in the circus, There's an awful lot of stuff there on the floor, and they've got to clean it up. It's sort of like what Putin faced when he came into office back over 20 years ago. Yeltsin had left a mess, bigger than elephants, really. And it took a long time to clean up, but he's cleaned it up now, and he's got a formidable array very sophisticated weaponry, which we can't shoot down. That was number 3. Now, number 4, of course, were the agreements in Istanbul 6 weeks after the beginning of the war, under which Ukrainian negotiators, and they were top level. The chief negotiator was Akramaya, is David. He was a very close friend of Zelensky. Okay, so they agreed. What were the terms of the agreement? Well, first of all, no Ukraine and NATO. Okay, and then a demilitarization along the lines. Limits on Ukrainian forces, limits on Russian forces, deferral of thorny issues like Crimea till the end, and pretty much, the Donbass remains under Ukrainian control with allowances for hopefully a little bit more regional autonomy. Though that was the deal. It was initialed. Okay, Boris Johnson came in. Now, this is more than just Western press reporting. Akramea, the head negotiator, went to the Kiev Post in Ukraine and he said, look, this is what happened. We had this thing all signed, sealed, and delivered. I initialed it. And Boris Johnson came in and said, no deal, fight on. We'll give you all the help you need for as long as it takes. And if you don't go our way, if you don't reject this thing, well, sotto voce, then we won't be able to weaken Russia, and we won't be able to give you any help, because that's the name of the game. Don't let the Ukrainians know about this, but that's what will support you. Doesn't have to do much with you. It has to do with weakening Russia. So Zelensky, he's a smart guy. He knew all that, but he did it anyway. So that was the fourth and the final thing. What really astounds me, and I've been at this 50 years, is that the Russians waited months and months and months before revealing that a settlement had been agreed to. And it seems to me that sometimes they hold their heaviest ammunition for later. I don't know why, but the press, well, I suppose if they revealed it rather than the Ukrainians, no one would believe them, but that's the deal. So there's these 4 things. And what I'm saying here is that if Trump doesn't realize that he has to rebuild some kind of trust with Kremlin leaders, and that his predecessors have left a lot of stuff on the ground of that circus, okay, that he's got to clean up or have his minions clean up, that he's not going to get anywhere, because the measure of trust between Putin and the White House is -5 right now. It's worse than 0.
And in terms of connecting the dots and understanding that things don't happen in a vacuum, you were talking about the United States putting missiles in Ukraine. We went through this. We've gone through this before. It was called, let me see. The Cuban Missile Crisis. And a lot of people only see that event in terms of Russian missiles in Cuba, because they don't know about the U.S. missiles that were in Turkey and I think in Poland as well. And that was a matter of not only getting Russian missiles out of Cuba, but getting U.S. missiles pointed at Russia out of Turkey, out of Poland. Khrushchev and Kennedy.
That's right. The big difference, of course, was they talk to each other.
They talk to each other, right.
Okay. Now, there have been no conversations, to my knowledge, between Biden and Putin for 2.5 years.
In fact, what I understand is, and you would know this better than I, that Biden has directed Blinken not to take calls from Lavrov or not to take calls from anybody in the Kremlin.
Well, if Lavrov has called Blinken over the last 2 years, he's gotten a busy signal every time because it takes the phone.
Okay.
Now, another nicety here is that the Russians are careful to keep at the highest level, communications between Russia and the United States discreetly secret, okay? So here's Lavrov talking to Tucker Carlson, right? Carlson says, when's the last time you talked to Lavrov? and Lavrov says, well, I hope that Antony won't be angry with me, but what happened the last time, it was almost 2 years ago. We were at an international conference, and as one speaker was winding up, one of Tony's assistants came and said, "Mr. Blinken would like to talk to you. Would that be okay?" And I said, "Sure." "Well, we have to go into this other room. Is that okay?" "Sure." So we went into the other room, and instead of going in, Blinken stopped at the beginning so everybody could see that he was willing to shake hands with me, says Lavrov. We didn't say anything other than hello, nice day out there, isn't it? Okay. And that was it. So, I hope that Tony is not angry with me for sharing that. Well, that's no joke. They are very, very careful not to share things that have been said. And so when Biden shared what he told Putin the only time they met personally, 16 June 2021, right, in Geneva. Biden comes out of that meeting and he says, "Now, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to share what I told President Putin, but Russia has this terrible problem. It's called China. Very long, thousands of miles of border. The Chinese are threatening them. The Chinese there's Chinese claims on Russian territory. Chinese aspire to be not only the most big economic but military power. The Russians are really being squeezed. Here's a word: being squeezed by China." I told him that. Now, I guess that's what Blinken and Sullivan thought. I mean, everything they did since then was an attempt to make sure that they exploited this situation where Russia was being squeezed by China. I can imagine Putin after the summit with his advisors watching this on the boob tube. Biden was at the airport for part of this, and he says, "Oh, they're trying to get him on the plane." He says, "Oh, they're being squeezed by Russia. They got a big headache. They get him on the plane." And Putin turns to us and says, "Huh? Somebody tell Biden that this is a fraternal embrace. It's not a squeeze, and it's tighter than ever before." And that's the tectonic shift. I'm glad I had a chance to say this. I mean, great power politics 101. You've got a major shift in the correlation of forces. You have China and Russia together as never before. That makes a big difference. The only question, of course, is whether even now Blinken and Sullivan understand that, and whether even now they realize that if they do something really strange with respect to Ukraine, for example, in the next 5 weeks, they're going to face, I think, some more than just saber rattling out in the South China Sea. China is in this for the duration. They're allies with Russia now. Putin has taken to calling them allies, even though they have no mutual defense treaty to explicitly in legalistic terms. So that's the big sticky wicket. It has to do also with the West Asia, because the Russians and the Chinese have deep economic interests in what happens there, and it's just as a matter of time before they're going to tell Netanyahu, "Look, the whole world is against what you're doing there. Don't go any farther, or we're gonna have to do something militarily, either in the Red Sea or in other parts of that part of the world."
Cherie asks, "Isn't Ray the best?" And the answer is yes, he is. Two more quick questions, and thank you so much for granting me this time. We talked about the ATACMS, the Joe Biden approving the ATACMS to longer range missiles going into Russia. We now have the Ukraine assassinating a Russian general. Your thoughts about it? Is President Putin trying to hold his powder in anticipation of a Trump administration? And do you see the Biden administration compressing the calendar whereas they were thinking, well, we're going to do these things in February, March, or April when Kamala wins. She's lost. Now they've got to compress their calendar. And so they're expediting a lot of the aggression, trying to provoke or trying to lock Trump into a situation where it becomes increasingly more difficult for him to find peace. That long question, but I hope that question made sense.
It does make sense, and that's the conventional wisdom. It makes sense to them to make it really difficult, to make it, make the stuff pile higher and deeper there on the floor of that circus, so that Trump will have even more digging to do. But it's also a sort of a juvenile, adolescent attitude. We promised to give the Ukrainians everything they need for as long as it takes. Now the Ukrainians are accusing us of not doing enough. Zelensky's never satisfied, so we got to make it clear to the world that we fulfilled our promise. We gave him, even when he asked us if he could attack Russia with our missiles, we said, "Oh, okay, all right, you can do that as well."
Lindsey Graham has committed, we're in it till the last Ukrainian dies. I mean, what more could you ask for?
Yeah. Well, that's the cynical thing, As much as I'm appalled by all this, the prospect of Tony Blinken and Jake Sullivan, blaming this debacle on a lack of Ukrainian troops. And that's what they've said. Sullivan back 2 months ago, now Blinken saying, look, we gave them everything. We gave them the most sophisticated. We gave them F-16s. We gave them Abrams tanks. We gave them everything they asked for. And it turned out that they didn't have enough troops to man these things, or they run out of. It's their fault. Okay, now so start drafting 18, 19, 20-year-olds. That's what you have to do, for God's sake.
Empty your prisons.
Yeah, right.
They've been emptying Ukrainian prisons and sending prisoners into the meat grinder.
Yeah. So this is, it's not my fault. Those Ukrainians just didn't measure up, because we gave them everything they needed for as long as they wanted. Now that's juvenile, that's adolescent, and also that's incredibly cynical, because I may have mentioned this before, not today, but it bears re-mentioning, that Obama, whatever his faults, he knew damn well that getting involved in arming Ukraine with offensive missiles was nothing but trouble. And he told his advisors, look, this is 2015, all right? Look, we're worried about Ukraine? Okay. There's nothing worse we could do than to give the Ukrainians the idea that they could prevail over a much stronger Russia. That's why I'm not giving offensive missiles or offensive weaponry to them. So just realize, it's a no-win situation. You're not going to make sure that Ukraine can prevail, because it cannot prevail short of World War III. And Mr. President Biden has always said he doesn't want World War III. Now, here's a little footnote to that. There was a fellow who was Deputy Secretary of State at the time. And when Biden made that clear, the Deputy Secretary of State said, you're absolutely right, Mr. President, because whatever we gave the Ukrainians, the Russians would match. And then they'd double. And then they'd triple. And then they'd quadruple. Okay. Who was that? Do you know the name of the Deputy Secretary of State at the time?
Do they call him Tony?
Yeah, they call him Tony. It was Anthony Blinken. So, I don't know. Anyhow, that's the kind of people he's on.
Really quickly to that point, Ray, because I think one of the things that a lot of people also overlook is that the type of war of attrition that is being fought on Ukrainian soil right now is exactly the kind of war that Russia has been preparing for the last 20 years. So how are you going to defeat an adversary such as Russia that has been just stockpiling artillery after artillery after artillery after artillery. This is a war that they have been preparing for. And we just thought, oh, well, NATO will go in there and mop this up in a couple weeks. Now we'll turn the ruble into rubble and everything will be fine.
Incredibly naive and dishonest. After all, this is the way the Red Army operated during World War II. There'd be no stopping the Russians, given their numerical advantage, not only in population, but in their ability to manufacture replacement arms like 155 millimeters shells for howitzers. You know, it's really worse than I've ever seen it before with respect to intelligence, Wilmer. Because in December 2022, the Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, told the President and everybody else who would listen, the Russians are running out of ammunition. And they have no indigenous capability to replace their battlefield losses. I mean, it's really, really pretty good outlook for us. And then just a couple of months later, the head of Central Intelligence, the agency, Bill Burns, told the President, hey, good news, Putin has already lost in Ukraine. July of last year, okay, already lost. And so the President gets up in Helsinki and he said, good news, Putin has already lost in Ukraine. And Burns embellished that by saying, the ineptitude of the Russian military forces has now been exposed for the whole world to see. Okay, now, where did they get this stuff, you know? I don't know. They made it up, I guess. I guess they want to make the President feel good. Now, you may know that I go on this, I brief the President, President Robert Scheer, okay, every week for the President's Daily Brief, which I used to actually do under the Reagan administration. And I told this little story on the way out this past week. I said, now, Mr. President, President Scheer, on the way out of the Director of National Intelligence offices, where, of course, I prepare the briefing, I was pulled aside by Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, and she said, Ray, you're going to see the President. I said, well, I don't know, this is a little awkward, Ray, but if the subject of pardons comes up, okay, only if it comes up, I feel real badly about, I don't know why I told him those, anyhow, I guess I was trying to make him feel good. Yeah, well, that worked. Anyhow, could you mention my name if pardons comes up, you know? And Bill Burns talked to him about that. He liked his name mentioned too. Okay, could you do that, Ray? I said, I'll see if I can do that sometime. So I told that to President Scheer, and he said, what was the word he used? Beyond the pale. This is crazy, you know. So what I'm saying here is that there's a big lineup for pardon me, pardon me, pardon me, and I would hardly be surprised if not only Avril Haines and Bill Burns, but also Hillary Clinton are all on that pardon list before Joe goes into the western sunset of Delaware.
Final question, and it's a two-parter. How concerned should Americans be about a developing conflict, whether that be the expansion of the conflict with Russia or the expansion of the conflict with China over Taiwan, or even what's happening in the Middle East? Why should Americans care, and how concerned should they be? Ray McGovern.
Wilmer, I spoke of the tectonic shift in the correlation of forces. Russia and China together. Okay, it used to be the long axis is Russia, then China, and the U.S. used to be equilateral, right? Now it's isosceles. We have the short end of the stick, so to speak. This is all important. It's all important as to whether Trump's advisors will realize that. Now, Tulsi Gabbard is one smart lady. I know that from having briefed her personally back 15 years ago, okay? Now, she knows that. Will she be able to prevail and be able to say, look, Mr. President, it's not just you against Russia. It's not just you against China. It's not just you against whatever the forces are the can of worms in Syria. It's Russia and China are together as never before, and they're going to act together. That's too much to ignore, Mr. President. Russia is not squeezing, or China is not squeezing Russia. They have this fraternal embrace that just won't quit. Be advised, don't do anything stupid.
Ray McGovern. Happy holidays to you and to your family. Thank you so much for your time today. Greatly, greatly appreciate it. And as always, Ray, look forward to having you back.
Thanks, Wilmer. Good to be with you.
Folks, thank you, Ray McGovern. Really appreciate that. Thank you all so much for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon. Stay tuned for a new episode tomorrow. Please follow and subscribe, leave a review, share the show. Follow us on social media. You can find all the links below in the show description. Remember, folks, that this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge. Talk without analysis is just chatter, and we don't chatter on Connecting the Dots. Go to raymcgovern.com. Go to raymcgovern.com, and you can find the links to the things that we referenced here today. See you all tomorrow. Until then, I am Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Thank you, Mr. McGovern.